Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. With Hurricane Milton causing all this havoc, it's got me thinking a lot about hurricanes. And we're in luck. We've got a whole stack of reports and research to dive into today to really get a better understanding of these powerful storms. So, get this. A hurricane can unleash the same amount of energy as 10 atomic bombs every
Whoa.
single second.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's the kind of power we're talking about.
Hey,
Just
Jack.
incredible. So, let's break it down. What actually is a hurricane? It's not just any old storm
Right.
with a bit of rain and wind.
Yeah, you're right. There's a certain threshold. A hurricane is actually a type of tropical cyclone, but it's got to reach wind speeds of at least 74 miles per hour.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like having a cheetah run at you full speed.
Wow, that's a scary thought. That really paints a picture. And they're not called hurricanes everywhere, are they?
You got it. They have different names depending on where they form, like typhoons or cyclones.
Right.
Yeah, and knowing the difference between these terms can really help you understand forecasts, especially if you live in a hurricane-prone region.
Yeah, for sure. Now we know that these storms form over warm ocean water. But what's going on there? What makes a hurricane? And why wouldn't we see one forming in, say, the desert?
Well, it all starts with that warm ocean water. Think of it like fuel for the storm. You've got these thunderstorms gathering heat and moisture, and all that warm air just naturally wants to rise.
Right, like a hot air balloon.
Yeah.
Exactly. A desert doesn't have that moisture, though, does it?
Yeah.
That's got to be why hurricanes form over water.
Exactly. And as that warm, moist air rises, it cools. And the water vapor in the air condenses. It forms clouds. And here's the really fascinating part. That condensation, it releases even more heat, which creates this incredible cycle that just keeps building and building.
Wow. So we've got this rising air, clouds are forming, and that leads to that classic spiral shape of a hurricane.
Exactly. And right at the center of it all, you have the eye of the storm. And it's almost eerie how calm it can be in the eye, surrounded by the most intense part, the eye wall.
The eye wall, that's where things get really intense, right?
Yeah.
What exactly is happening in the eye wall?
The eye wall. It's like the heart of the beast. It's where you find the strongest winds, the heaviest rainfall, all that energy concentrated in that ring around the eye.
Okay, so we have the spinning system with a calm center, and the eye wall is where things get really wild. So let's talk about those powerful winds. What causes them?
It all comes down to pressure differences. The center of the hurricane has incredibly low pressure, while the air surrounding it has higher pressure. And air always wants to rush in to fill that low pressure area, kind of like equalize everything. And the Earth's rotation makes that air spiral.
Okay, so for someone like me who doesn't speak weather, what does low pressure actually mean in this context? Why does it cause such powerful winds?
Okay, so imagine a vacuum cleaner. The eye is like the vacuum nozzle, creating this kind of void. The stronger the vacuum, the faster the air rushes in from the sides to fill that void.
Right.
In a hurricane, that rush of air is the wind we experience. And it can be incredibly powerful because those pressure differences are so extreme.
That makes a lot more sense. We can't forget about the rain, though. Hurricanes are famous for dumping huge amounts of rain. So how does that tie into everything?
Well, remember all that warm, moist air rising?
Yeah.
That's essentially what leads to rain. As the air rises and cools, it can't hold on to all that moisture anymore, so it releases it as rain.
And this is where places like Florida,
Yeah.
they become so vulnerable.
Exactly. Florida's geography, being a peninsula surrounded by warm water, makes it a prime target for hurricanes. And then you've got the Gulf Stream, that warm ocean current, flowing right past its coast, providing even more fuel for hurricanes.
Right. So the hurricane forms over the warm water, but then it can move over land, and that's when it starts to lose power.
You got it. Land cuts off the hurricane's energy source. It's like unplugging a vacuum cleaner. Eventually, it just stops working.
That's a great analogy. Now predicting these storms, it seems almost impossible. How do scientists even begin to track something that's so powerful and unpredictable?
It's definitely a challenge, but we're getting better all the time. We use a combination of satellites, radar, and computer models to track these storms and try to predict their path.
I even heard they're using artificial intelligence now. Is that right?
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really exciting. There are machine learning models, like Hurricast, that are changing the game of hurricane prediction.
Okay, let's dive into that. What is Hurricast, and how does it actually work? It sounds a bit like science fiction.
It's more like science fact now. Hurricast is a machine learning model, and it analyzes tons of data from past hurricanes, their paths, intensities, you name it. It uses all that information to find patterns, and then it looks at what's happening right now. Temperatures, wind speeds, even tiny shifts in atmospheric pressure.
So it's like giving a computer a crash course in
Nice.
Hurricane History 101, but it's actually learning from it.
Right, exactly. It doesn't just memorize the data, it finds connections and adapts, which helps it make predictions in ways traditional models can't.
That's incredible. But how does that translate into real-world help? Can you give an example? Maybe using Hurricane Milton?
Well, for one thing, it means faster and more accurate predictions. Imagine being able to give people an extra day or two of warning before a hurricane hits.
That could make a huge difference for people who need to evacuate or prepare their homes.
Absolutely. And it's not just about predicting the path anymore. Hurricane is getting really good at forecasting intensity, too. That means knowing if a storm is going to rapidly intensify, like Milton did, and how strong it will be when it makes landfall.
So giving people more information, which hopefully translates into making safer decisions.
Precisely. And the more data we feed into these models, the better they get at making these predictions.
That's a bit mind-blowing. It sounds like this kind of technology could significantly reduce the damage hurricanes cause.
It's a powerful tool, no doubt. But it's just one tool among many. We still need to focus on strengthening infrastructure in hurricane-prone areas, improving our early warning systems, and making sure people understand how to prepare for these storms.
So it's a combination of cutting-edge technology and good old-fashioned preparedness.
Exactly. We need to use every resource we have to outsmart these storms and protect our communities.
You mentioned climate change earlier, and I know that's a complex topic, but can you tell us more about the connection between climate change and hurricanes like Milton? Are we seeing more intense storms because of it?
That's a question scientists are actively studying. There's a lot of research going on right now to determine how climate change is impacting hurricanes.
So we can't say for sure yet if climate change caused Hurricane Milton.
It's not that simple. Hurricanes are complex events, influenced by many factors. But what we are seeing is that warmer ocean temperatures and rising sea levels, both linked to climate change, can potentially fuel more intense hurricanes.
Like you were saying earlier, that warm ocean water is the fuel for these storms.
Exactly. And with climate change, we're essentially adding more fuel to the fire. There's also research suggesting that climate change could be contributing to hurricanes moving more slowly, which means they linger in one place for longer, dumping more rain and causing more flooding.
So even if climate change isn't directly causing more hurricanes, it could be making them more intense and destructive?
That's the concern, and it's why scientists are working hard to understand these connections better.
It sounds like we've got a lot to learn. But even with the unknowns, being prepared is crucial. Speaking of which, let's talk about what people can do to prepare before a hurricane hits. Because it can feel overwhelming, especially when you see those storm maps covering entire coastlines.
You're right, it can be daunting, but it's all about breaking it down into manageable steps. First and foremost, know your evacuation zone.
For those of us who might not be familiar, what exactly does that mean?
Sure, if you live in a coastal area, your community likely has designated zones. Based on the risk of flooding during a hurricane, you can usually find your zone online, sometimes on your city or county's website.
So that tells you if you're in an area that might need to evacuate?
Exactly. Knowing your zone ahead of time helps you act quickly if an evacuation order is issued.
And it's important to have a plan, right? If you need to evacuate, where would you go? Who would you contact?
Absolutely. Having a plan can make a huge difference. Decide where you'd go. Maybe a friend or family member's house further inland, or a designated evacuation shelter. And make sure you have a way to contact family members in case you get separated.
Those are great practical tips. What about supplies? What are some essentials people should have on hand?
Think about what you'd need if the power went out for a few days, or even a week. Water is crucial. Have at least a gallon per person per day on hand.
A gallon a day.
Yeah. It's always better to be over-prepared, especially with something as essential as water. Then focus on non-perishable food items, canned goods, granola bars, things like that.
Right. What about, like, flashlights and batteries?
Those are must-haves. Also, a first aid kit is essential, and consider having a battery-powered or hand-crank weather radio in case you lose cell service or internet access.
Oh, right. Good point. Don't forget important documents and medications and any supplies you need for your pets.
Yes, all important things to remember.
It's amazing how many things we take for granted when everything's working.
Right.
Like power and internet access.
Absolutely. Hurricanes really remind us how reliant we are on those things and how important it is to be prepared to go without them for a while.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of reminders, We've talked about how hurricanes form over warm ocean water. But earlier we were talking about rain, and it made me realize we haven't really defined what rain actually is.
It's easy to overlook the everyday things.
Right.
But rain really is fascinating when you think about it. Imagine tiny droplets of water vapor, so light they float in the air. As that warm air rises and cools, these droplets start to huddle together, forming clouds.
Like a microscopic dance party?
Exactly. And as they bump into each other, they get bigger and heavier until finally, splash down, rain.
And that's
Yeah.
how we get rain.
That-
It's all connected, isn't it? The warm ocean water,
Mhm.
the rising air, the cooling, the condensation. It's like a beautifully
Wow.
choreographed weather ballet.
It really is. And it's a good reminder that even though we're talking about the destructive power of hurricanes, these are natural processes that are essential to how our planet functions.
Right. It's all about balance. We talked a lot about the science today. But I want to touch on the human side of things for a moment. Hurricanes are about more than just wind and rain. They're about resilience, about communities coming together to face these challenges.
I couldn't agree more. Hurricanes are a force of nature, but they also reveal the incredible strength of the human spirit. We see it time and time again. Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers lending a hand, entire communities rebuilding from the ground up.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see people come together in the face of adversity.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, and that we're capable of overcoming incredible challenges when we work together.
That's a really powerful message to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the science of hurricanes to the power of human resilience.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
Before we let you go, we want to leave you with something to ponder. We've talked about how scientists are using incredible technology to predict hurricanes. But what if we could use that same technology to lessen their impact? Imagine if we could one day steer hurricanes away from populated areas, or even weaken them before they make landfall. It might sound like science fiction, but who knows what the future holds? That's something to think about. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep asking those questions.